G'day folks, Greg Budd from Bud's Baits here.
Welcome to the African Lure Craftsman. In the ensuing episodes, we'll be taking you along while we design and handcraft timber lures and hopefully get out into the water to use them. I've designed lures for some of the big boys in the industry and I sell my lures worldwide. I'll do my best to show you some of the hacks I've learned along the way. Stay with us and experience the wonders of casting lures to bass, giant catfish, tigerfish in Zimbabwe, which I'm fortunate to call my home, and cross borders with us as we'll target the denizens of the deep all along the African coast in magical places such as Mozambique. Through it all, I'll share a bit of my daily life and business experience, which can be quite tough in Zimbabwe at times, as we take you along to run the daily gauntlet of survival. Subscribe and click the notifications button to stay with us.
Good day, good folk. Welcome back to the African Lure Craftsman. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to talk about lures. We're going to talk about how they're conceived and what makes us design a lure and why we design it. And to start that, we're going to start with one particular lure. Although I don't make it, it's made by Halco Australia, which is the Skim Stick. It's got a very good story behind it, and I'll relate that story to you and tell you how I came by designing this. So I worked on Margarook Island in Mozambique for a while. Margarook is a part of the Bazaruta archipelago of islands, and it is a tourist destination. Although when I worked on it, though there were some lodges, there was no one on the island. It was me and a couple of staff members, and I was there to basically oversee the workshops and get the workshops cleaned up. While I was there, I noticed there was a lot of kingfish activity on the bay side of the island. There's a big long channel running down the length of the island, which is about 2.5 kilometers. And at night time, according to maritime law, they had to have a spotlight there. So the spotlight went on at 6 o'clock every evening, and it went off at 6 o'clock the following morning. As it got dark, it cast a half moon of light across the bay side and across the channel. And what that actually did was attract all the bait fish, and they used to come in their thousands. We used to have garfish or ballyhoo, or whatever you want to call them, in whichever part of the world you are. We used to have mullet, and all sorts of bait fish used to follow or come in for the light. The game fish followed those, and largely it was big eye kingfish, but periodically you would see or catch larger fish, the occasional GT at night, and plenty of sharks around there as well. The big eye kingfish you could tell because they were always chopping up bait in the surface, and you could just hear a constant chop of activity in the bay. And watching this and observing this, I noticed how they were hunting. And how they were hunting is they were balling bait in a ball, and they would circle the bait, and 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 of the bait fish would break off, and they'd make a run for it, normally towards the beach, and the kingfish would just hone in on those ones. And these things would skip across the top of the water and tell they were either run down or they escaped. Using that, I thought what we needed was a popper type bait that could skim across the surface of the water, causing a little bit of water disruption, but also creating a little bit of a pitter-patter, like the noise that's created by those fleeing garfish and mullet. And I came up with this. Basically, I went to the office, I did a drawing. As my tooling and equipment was minimal on the island, I made a very, very rough one. Went out the next night, and it worked an absolute dream. Because when I came back to Harare, I actually sat down in my workshop and I made the proper one, which then, through a series and a process, went to Halco, and Halco made this, which is the marketed commercial Skim Stick. I made it in several sizes, some smaller than this, some larger, and I used it across the board on everything. Not only in that scenario in the dark or in the spotlight would it work, but it would work in any scenario where you found bait fish boiling. And it was quite successful. So that in itself was the infancy and the beginnings of the Halco Skim Stick. So the Skim Stick was my first commercial success with lure making. I was able to sell that design to Halco. Halco have had reasonable success with it. It's still made today. It's still in their catalogue. And that started me down the path of creating or starting other projects, which I then punted and sold to other companies across the globe, in the States, in Malaysia, in various places like that. That eventually led to Bud's Baits, and I thought, why don't I create my own range of lures and keep it simple, things that I use, things that I've had success with, and offer these to the public. And it's been a real challenge, I must say, but I've finally reached a stage where I am supplying distributors and retailers virtually across the world, or individuals. It all started with the slick fin. The slick fin was originally a straight stick bait. It had one toe point and two hook points. I then decided at a later date, because of the way I like to weight my stick baits, which is always weight forward, to add a top toe point to create a vibe type bait, and it works superbly. So as you'll know, with any vibes, you'll find the weight is center low or forward low, and your toe point, if I held it like that, it will sit pretty even. So that created a very effective bait, which I started selling to individuals. I used myself. I've used this in Angola, I've used it in Gabon, I've used it in various places in Mozambique, and had success on a plethora, a range of different game fish. That was my first Bud's Baits offering, and I make that lure in 5 sizes. From the little 100 millimeter through to the 125, through to the 145, the 165, which you've just seen, and a 185, which I actually haven't got here at the moment, but those are the different sizes that we get in the slick fin. Fantastic little lure this, and again, I wanted something that had multiple actions, had a very realistic stick bait action, again being weight forward, it does create its own action. Tow it or retrieve it straight to the rod tip, and this fish will basically, or this lure will basically do a slalom type roll, and it'll look very realistic as well. Tow it from the top toe point, and you've got a very tight vibe action, which is sending a shimmer of light and flash all across the water column and creating that vibration, which is a strike trigger. So one thing led to another, and we started creating pure stick baits. I like to make everything with a bit of an action. So as I said before, everything's slightly weight forward, or the weight in these lures is here. These are stick baits. The name is self-descriptive because it's called a kick stick. And you can either retrieve it straight to the rod tip, and it gives a very realistic fishy sort of swim, or you can sweep it and the tail kicks out in a manner, particularly if you're fishing it higher in the water column or near the surface, it creates quite a bit of a splash with that tail kicking out as well. This is a weighted one. You can just let it sink to any depth in the water column you want to fish it, and then start your retrieve, or you can just close that bail straight away as it hits water and crank away. And either way, very fantastic action for that. That's a 165 there. Again, caught lots of fish. This is the Bud's Baits version, the commercial handmade version, if that makes sense, that I'm doing at the moment. But this started, and I'll bring out the lure here, from this little guy here, which is kind of had a facelift. It might look brand new, and but that's actually caught so many fish, it's quite crazy, and it's been everywhere in Africa and been redone and had all the teeth marks filled in and refoiled and redone and refoiled. And I keep on doing that to this lure because it just keeps on producing very similar or the same action as the kickstick, and that was the original. That and this guy here were the two originals actually of the kickstick. Slightly different, as you'll see, but both have the same action. That's actually even got number 1 written on the top there, just in case I forgot, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, that's where we got the kickstick from, was those two there. That fishing in Gabon for Kibera snapper, for brown snapper, for Senegalese cob, for Jack Crevalle, for all a range of species, was fantastic. And yeah, certainly did its job. So in front of me, we have a range of lures, most of which are handmade in mine. There are a few others thrown in here, which we're going to be taking to Mozambique in the near future on a trip which I'm very, very excited about. This is going to be the culmination of a range of lures I've done, many of which I've used before. In fact, all of them I've used before and caught fish on. But I really want to try new techniques and different things that I've been conceiving and thinking about with certain lures. The slick fin is a dual action lure. It's either a stick bait or it's a vibe, but it makes a fantastic jig as well. The way it's weighted, this little guy weighs 60 grams. It sinks like a stone, and almost like you'd fish a Lucanus jig, a slow jig, you can fish this as well. It's got a very enticing action as the swell goes up. It really does do a bit of a shimmy like that, flashing light to all corners of the water column. And I think it'll be fantastic in that role. So that's one of the things I'm excited about. The little Ripstick is another lure I make, and this has a story behind it as well. As I got into the Australian market, my distributor there is based in Melbourne, and they have a seasonal bluefin run, bluefin tuna. Most of them are schoolies, sort of 20, 30 kilos, thereabouts. But they do get the barrels sort of up to 100 kgs, and they wanted something that was bulletproof, but small enough to fish schools of tuna when they're feeding on small bait. They wanted it heavy so it could sink and could be worked deep if you wanted to, or you could work it at the top of the water column just by closing your bail and winding it as soon as it hits the surface. As you can see, relatively big hooks. I've got a 5/0 on the belly. I've got a 4/0 on the back. That's how I like to use it. Those are connected to 1.6 millimeter wire through, which is also bound wire, and it's set in the jack dust and super glue concoction that I've previously done or mentioned in other videos. So that little guy is a gem. He can catch anything from a shad or a tailor or a bluefish of 2 or 3 or 4 kilos, or you can catch 110 kg bluefin tuna, and that's not going to break. That led to the slightly bigger version, which is the 130 Ripstick, and they just again wanted something slightly bigger in a range of patterns that could do the same job. So these little guys, and as the name suggests, Ripstick, they swim straight to the rod tip with a straight retrieve, rip it or sweep it, and it really has got a panicky sort of action, and the tail kicks out. A very fish enticing strike trigger. You can't have a lineup without a popper. Now, this is not a production popper. This is a very old one, a paint, but this is the first of a series of poppers I made, which the idea was to have a swim popper. Something that created action and was almost like a wake bait that you'd use for bass fishing as well, but obviously for game fish. So if I turn that around, you'll see there it's got the cup face and it's got a totally flat bib type front there. What that does is it sucks water, sucks bubbles, goes just under the surface. And those birds, by the way, guys, that are making all the noise in the background are red-billed woodhoopers. They frequent this garden. I think they can sense that we're here and might get a little bit of a feed, because I do put grain and various fruits and things out there occasionally as well. I think for right now, though, just hold on. Shut up. They need to be quiet, and we can continue. Oh, they're listening. Back to the popper. So that's basically where we started with this popper. Cup face and a flat face there, a bib, so it would wake and kind of wobble and shimmy under the water. That led, and I'm going to put that down, to various other poppers. This is actually a new concept here, which I call a shift bait. And again, the flat square face. Understanding something with poppers, guys, you've got a round face, you cup less water. If you've got a square lip on top, you're cupping more of the surface, you're producing more of a splash and more of a pop, basically. This guy is the same sort of thing. He's got a slight angled sort of cup there. It pops, but it dives underwater, and then it does a very erratic shift all over the place, which again is very fish enticing. I think this might even be my next production lure. Looking forward to testing this guy in Mozambique. Problem with testing prototypes is I've got only one, so maybe I should make another. Don't know if there'll be time, but that's going to be an exciting venture, that. Next, we went from that guy to various different poppers. I'm just going to dig some out here. I don't know where they are. There's so many things, and there's some weird and wonderful concoctions here. I mean, that paint pattern, by the way, in case you're wondering, I think most people know it is very, very easy to do, is paint all the bright colors in your layers first, wrap it in rubber bands, spray black over into all the gaps of the rubber bands. If you look very closely on this, you can see more on that side, the gaps in the rubber band, and it's very, very effective, this pattern. But that was another design in the cup face and wake type popper, which I basically call a pop and rip or pop and swim popper, and that eventually led to the culmination of the actual Bud's commercial handmade lure, if that makes sense. Again, wow, quite a mouthful. Which is now called the Tokoloshi. Tokoloshi is a little goblin, mythic goblin type creature in African mythology, and I think it's quite apt for this guy. But he does exactly the same. So he's got this flat face there, he's got the cup, he pops and he swims, and that is the last lure in my lineup. This I make in several sizes as well. This is the smallest. It goes up right up to a 165 size. Which you'll use for kingfish and tuna. This guy here, more for the little kingfish. I use it for other species as well, tigerfish and anything really. And I'm sure you could even catch bass, though I haven't personally fished for bass with it as yet. But that's what we've got for you. All of these function followed form, form followed function. Not sure which way it goes. But they came from sitting on the water, observing things, making an initial attempt at producing a bait, and then refining it over time. And that's, I think, the only way to do things. We always are learning. We go through a process of learning in our lives, I think. And I think I've got a lot to learn when it comes to making lures, and there's a lot more exciting stuff to come. Thanks for taking time to watch this episode. We did something a little bit different this time for a reason, because we just wanted you to observe and see the lures we're going to be using on the forthcoming trip to Mozambique, which I'm very excited about. If you do like what you see, click like and the notifications button and subscribe. And what we're going to be bringing you in the near future is not only the fishing and the testing of all these lures, so you can witness for yourselves that they actually work and catch good fish, which is always the best prize of making a handmade lure. But we're going to be bringing you a whole series on workshop equipment, things you'll need and things you need in your workshop to make lures like this. And we'll also be taking you along on builds of future commercial Buds Baits lures, as well as some commemoratives, which we've got coming up. And I think it's going to be a really exciting time. Thanks again. See you next episode.